Good evening. Thanks for being with us on this really, really wet night. And also thanks for hanging on for some of the people that were coming in from the rain. My name's Mike Denham, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to our kickoff program for this year's 2022-23 edition of the Florida Lecture Series, which is produced by the Lawton Chiles Center for Florida History. Whether you've been with us before or since the 1990s when we began, or whether it's your first time, welcome. The Florida Lecture Series began back in 1996. It's hard to believe it's been that long, as a way to introduce students, faculty, and our community to Florida life and culture from a wide range of subjects. Those of you that have been with us before know that we've had history, literature, public affairs, environment, law, music, art, politics, public policy, and everything to do with Florida. In 2001, we established the Lawton Chiles Center for Florida History, and we expanded our charge of engaging Florida history and expanding the lecture series. Over the years, our speakers have included writers, public officials, and others who have explored Florida from a variety of viewpoints. We've hosted National Book Award winners, Pulitzer Prize winners, like tonight's special guest. Before we welcome our distinguished speaker, though, I'd like to say a few words about this year's programs and some other things. Next month, on October 6th, we'll welcome lawyer, entrepreneur, and Professor Raymond Vickers, who will take us through one of Florida and America's signature economic debacles, and that is the Florida banking crash of 1926. On November 17th, David Powell will share with us stories of Cuban refugees who came to Florida after Fidel Castro came to power in 1959. In the spring, we have 3 more great programs on topics ranging from violence on Florida's cattle frontier, the music scene in Tampa Bay in the 1960s and 70s, and finally a program on 1964, the year the Beatles came to Florida. That's going to be a real memorable event. Most people don't realize that they were here nearly a month, and this is really one of the first places they visited in the United States. We may have some additional programs as they become available, so stay in touch with us throughout the year by logging onto our website. And if you're not on our mailing list or email list, please see me or my secretary, Isabel, who is out in the lobby. I want to thank Crystal Norman and her staff for allowing us to use this fine facility, particularly all the great features with regard to lighting and sound, all those things that give me the heebie-jeebies if I have to worry about it myself. Also, I want to take the opportunity to thank our book manager, J.B. Bauer, from our Barnes & Noble store on campus. He is supposed to be here this evening, and he hasn't been here yet, and he makes all of our books of our authors available. Over the years, we've been blessed with wonderful financial support. I want to give you a special thank you to all of you who've donated to our efforts this year and in past years. It's donations like yours that bring us these programs to the public free of charge, and it's going to be another great year beginning tonight. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's special speaker, special guest. Jack Davis grew up in Tampa, went to USF, and then earned his doctorate degree from Brandeis University in Boston. After teaching at Eckerd College and at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, Jack joined the faculty of the University of Florida in 2002. He holds the Rothman Family Endowed Chair in Humanities and teaches environmental history and sustainability studies at UF. While at Florida, Jack has mentored numerous doctoral students, the names of which are familiar to you because they've graced our stage. Cynthia Barnett, Mary Adkins, Peggy McDonald, and of course Leslie Kemp Poole, just to name a few. Jack is the author of many books, including his first, Race Against Time, Culture and Separation in Natchez, Mississippi since 1930, which won the Charles S. Sydnor Prize for the best book in Southern history, published in 2001. After returning to Florida, Jack focused on topics related to environmental history. First, he focused on the life and career of Marjory Stoneman Douglas, and with two books on Miss Douglas. His second book was Everglades Providence, Marjory Stoneman Douglas and the American Environmental Legacy, or Century. This book won the Florida Book Award Gold Medal for nonfiction. Then, of course, in 2018, he published The Gulf, The Making of an American Sea, that earned him the Pulitzer Prize. That work and several others we're hopeful will be available tonight. And now the subject for tonight. Since the founding of our nation, the American bald eagle has symbolized America's strength, courage, and spirit. Jack will explore the history and significance of this American icon. His talk emerges from his latest book, The Bald Eagle, which you see a picture of, The Bald Eagle, An Improbable Journey of America's Bird. A frequent commentator on NPR and other media, Jack's work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Forbes, and the Atlantic Magazine. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Jack Davis.
Thank you, Mike, Dr. Denham, and he does a great job. It's a lot of work putting this lecture series together, and it's always a fabulous one. And so I congratulate him and all the others who are part of the organization of this series. Sorry, it's raining out there tonight. It's not the best way to start off the series for the year, but thank you for braving the weather. And I'm really pleased to be here. This is the second time I've spoken in the series, and I really enjoy this campus and the audience and just the people of Lakeland generally. So obviously tonight I'm going to talk about the bald eagle, and I'd like to start off by telling my audiences why I wrote this book on the bald eagle. Well, there are a couple of reasons. One is that I wanted to, as an environmental writer, I wanted to change the tone of environmental writing a little bit. I think typically typically environmental writing focuses on the doom and the gloom, and readers get a little weary of that, and so I wanted to change the tone a bit. There's plenty of grim and tragic in the bald eagle's history with the United States, but it is also this great conservation success story, which I'll talk about. So that's one reason. The other reason is that we are, and related to that great conservation success story, we're seeing bald eagles today in numbers and in frequency that we didn't, just 10, 15 years ago. And they're really spectacular birds. We love it when we see them. When we see one cross in the sky, it's, as I say, it's a poke the guy in the ribs next to you moment of excitement. And that's just watching one flying across the sky or perching in a tree. But this is even more spectacular when we see something like this. See the alligator in the back? So this video was done by a graduate student in journalism at University of Florida, and this is, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Paynes Prairie State Preserve, and this was at Paynes Prairie a couple of years ago, and Justin Bright is the videographer, and he got into making videos because he liked to skateboard. He skateboarded a lot. He competed, but he decided he wanted to start filming skateboarders. And he developed the perfect skills for filming shots like this. And so, again, this is a bird that we're seeing more frequently. We love it when we see it. So I thought it would be good to let readers know a little bit about this bird, to write a book that would tell us, something about its history with us and something about the bird itself. And the bald eagle is one of some 60 species of eagles that live across the globe. It is a large bird. There are northern bald eagles and southern bald eagles. Some scientists refer to them as subspecies. Others say no, they're just different gene pools. But those who live in the north tend to be larger than those in the south. Northern bald eagles, say in Alaska, can reach 14 pounds, which is heavy for a bird, and with a wingspan of up to 8 feet. Down here in Florida, the southern bald eagles are a bit lighter, 10, 12 pounds perhaps, usually around 10 pounds with an approximately 7-foot wingspan. And that's an adult at the top. This is a juvenile at the bottom, probably a year or two old. And when the juveniles leave their nest or leave their natal territory, generally around 18 or 20 weeks after they've hatched, when they leave the territory, the place where they were born, they are a chocolate brown. And they gradually gain some light feathers, some white feathers throughout their body, their wings and their body. But eventually, at age 4 or 5, they form the all-white head, all-white tail, and dark body. And their talons are generally yellow, and also their beak by this point as well. They are fishing raptors, like osprey. Osprey is a fishing raptor. But an osprey feeds exclusively on fish or marine life. Bald eagles prefer fish, but they will also eat land animals and birds. As I say in the book, they feed at all 3 tables. And they tend to build their nests very close to water. One study said typically within 100 yards of water. And their nests are large. They build the largest nest of North American birds. How many of you guys have seen a nest, a bald eagle nest? Well, quite a few of you. And you see how big they are, and the large sticks. And they refurbish those nests every year. And they're the constant home renovators. I don't know why they don't have a show on HGTV, because everybody else seems to have a home renovation show on HGTV. But and their nests can get quite large, probably larger than what you've seen. They've been known to reach 8 feet across the top. There was one nest in Ohio that came down in a storm. Its nesting tree came down in a storm in the 1920s, and it was 12 feet deep, and the estimated weight was 2 tons. No wonder that tree came down. The nest was 35 years old, built, added onto every year. The mating ritual of bald eagles is an extraordinary sight. Not very many people are privileged to see it, but this is a pair that are attracted to each other. They usually engage in flight, locking talons, and if you witness them, you see them engaging in all sorts of acrobatics. It's such an impressive sight that they inspired Walt Whitman to write a poem about the eagle's mating ritual that he called the Dalliance of the Eagles, and he included that poem in Leaves of Grass. It's a short poem, and I want to go ahead and read it to you. Skirting the river road, my forenoon walk, my rest, skyward in air a sudden muffled sound, the dalliance of the eagles. The rushing amorous contact high in space together, the clinching, interlocking claws, a living, fierce, gyrating wheel. 4 beating wings, 2 beaks, a swirling mass tight, grappling. In tumbling, turning, clustering loops, straight downward falling. Till over the river poised the twain yet one, a moment's lull. A motionless, still balance in the air, the parting talons loosing. Upward again on slow, firm pinions slanting their separate, diverse flight. she, hers, he, his, pursuing. So what he's talking about here is, and what these are doing, is at one point in their mating ritual or nuptial ritual, they will lock talons and they will somersault in the air, and they will fall and fall and fall, or tumbling, as he says. And just before they hit the ground or hit the water, they separate and fly off. On occasion, they don't separate quickly enough, and they land on the ground. There was a couple this past spring, I think it was, that didn't let loose in time, and they both ended up on the ground. They didn't die. They were rescued and rehabilitated. They're what are known as partial migrators or irregular migrators. The southern bald eagles tend to migrate north after the breeding season. Breeding season ranges different times in different parts of the country, but generally from late fall to early summer. Here, at least in Florida, the eagles will return to their breeding territory in the late fall or November or so, and then they will leave sometime in June. Up north, it's a bit later. They'll stick around later in the summer up north, and many of them don't start migrating south. The northern bald eagles don't start migrating south until late August or September. Where they go is totally random. They do not migrate in flocks. They go off on their own. The juveniles, fresh out of the nest, tend to be the most aggressive migrators. They're the ones that tend to fly the farthest. They're not good fishers at that point. Mom and dad don't teach them how to fish, and they have to learn that on their own. And so what they do is the juveniles tend to steal a lot from other eagles or osprey flying off with the fish who had successfully caught a fish. Justin Bright, the videographer, and I were watching bald eagles in Paynes Prairie one day, and watching them fish, and we saw two bald eagles competing over the same fish in midair, and the fish went back and forth between them 5 times. And they're also scavengers, just like vultures. They get down and dirty right there with the vultures. In fact, they'll kick the vultures out of the way to get the roadkill. And so be especially careful, since there's so many bald eagles these days, when you're driving down the road, and because they're like vultures, they are in danger of being hit by a car. But Florida eagles, some of them fly as far north as Canada. They don't fly out over the Atlantic. They stay along the seaboard, but I had this drawn like this just so you could see flight lines and destinations more clearly. But they'll go, some will just go as far as Georgia. They'll go some just as far as the Chesapeake, some all the way to Canada. Mississippi bald eagles will go up to Canada, or they'll just go into Arkansas or Tennessee. Colorado, there are a number of Colorado bald eagles that will migrate to Saskatchewan at the same time that Saskatchewan bald eagles are migrating to Colorado. So they're crossing each other. I don't know if they wave, there's a little wing motion saying hi, but surely Colorado eagles, when they go to Saskatchewan, are feeding at the same watering holes as the Saskatchewan eagles once did. Or did when they were in their breeding territory. And as I said, some birds, some eagles don't even migrate. If they can find food throughout the year, they'll stay in the same territory. They'll leave their nest and they'll branch, as it's called. They'll live in trees and on branches between breeding season. But if there's food available, even up north, they'll stay in the same place. Even if the ponds ice over, if an eagle can break through the ice, they'll do that. I could refer to them as the original ice fishers. But if the food becomes scarce, then they leave and they go in search of food. Native peoples have a long relationship with bald eagles, thousands of years. For many native groups, bald eagles are spirit birds. They're messengers between the people and their dead ancestors and the higher spirit. And their feathers and body parts are conduits between the people and the spirit world. And so traditionally, native peoples have taken bald eagles out of the wild, not excessively, for their feathers and body parts, which they use in religious ceremonies and rituals. The American relationship with the bald eagle dates to the original colonists. Coming European colonists who came to America were the Spanish, French, or the British. There were bald eagles all over North America, and they were all observed by all of those who began settling America observed the bald eagles in the early days. And they're an important moment, a pivotal moment in the American relationship with the bald eagle is the establishment or the adoption of the Great Seal of the United States in 1782 with the bald eagle, or an image of the bald eagle, on the front of the Great Seal of the United States. Now, some of you are familiar with the story of Ben Franklin, who wanted the turkey, the wild turkey, for the Great Seal of the United States and the national bird. Well, those are two falsehoods, actually. Ben Franklin did compare the morality of the bald eagle with the wild turkey, maintaining that the turkey was an honest and hardworking bird, while the bald eagle was a craven coward because it stole fish from osprey. And Ben Franklin was on the original congressional committee to design a seal, which was appointed on July 4, 1776, and also on the committee was Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. By the way, that committee failed miserably, and it took Congress another 6 years to finally come up with the right seal. But Franklin never said he wanted the wild turkey for a national representative or to be on the Great Seal of the United States. So that's a myth that he did. And the other falsehood is the bald eagle is not the national bird. How many of you guys knew that? Nobody. You're just looking at me in dumb silence. It is not the national. If you want to know what the national bird is, you'll have to read the book. If our book salesperson gets here. Oh, you are! Thank you for coming. But you also will be surprised to know what Ben Franklin proposed for the Great Seal of the United States. It wasn't the turkey. It wasn't the eagle. What he proposed will blow your mind. You'll have to read the book. I'm not going to tell you. Oh, I went the wrong way. Sorry. I think that the bald eagle was the right choice. It's truly an all-American bird. It lives only in the wild in North America. It lives nowhere else in the wild across the globe. And the only other eagle that is native to North America is the golden eagle, but the golden eagle lives in other parts of the Western Hemisphere. So the bald eagle is truly an all-American bird. And Congress knew that. Charles Thompson, who finally was the Secretary of the Congress, the Continental Congress, but at this time, 1782, was just called the Congress, who was Secretary of the Congress, said, "Oh my God, we're a year away from signing the peace treaty. We need a great seal so we can, put our imprint on the treaty." So he is the guy who came up with the idea of putting the bald eagle on the front of the Great Seal of the United States, and he said it must be an American eagle. The bald eagle it's a great choice, not only because it's all-American, but also because it's highly recognizable. Everybody can identify a bald eagle. But it's a bird that conveys many of the attributes that the United States associated with itself. that Americans associate with themselves and their culture: courage, strength, and freedom. And look at it. It also has that "don't tread on me" stare. You can't come up with a better bird than that. Now, Americans immediately fell in love with the image of the bald eagle once it was on the Great Seal of the United States. They really didn't pay attention to the image of the bald eagle before the Great Seal. Images in the decorative arts and on signs and on business logos before the Great Seal of eagles tended to be just a generic eagle, a non-ornithological eagle. But after 1782, the bald eagle became extremely popular. Of course, it's all over government and military insignia, has been dating back to the 18th century, on business logos, sports teams' uniforms. It's back in motorcycle jackets. There's an outfitter store, American Eagle, of course. Anybody in here speaking of American Eagle, anybody in here own an AMC Eagle, the car, at any point? Oh, you raise your hand very slowly. It was a car that wasn't worthy of its name, right? Am I right? And now, while Americans love the image, there was a different opinion about the species itself. John James Audubon hated the bald eagle. He couldn't stand the bird. For the same reasons that Ben Franklin allegedly didn't like the bald eagle. He truly wanted the turkey to be the representative of his country. He wrote that. And he hated the bald eagle so much that he went out and found a third species, or at least he thought he found a third species, which he called the bird of Washington. And he said he includes the bird of Washington in his big Birds of America album and his ornithology. And he maintained this was a third species, but he was fooled. It was an immature bald eagle. They are as big as the adults, but this is what the immature bald eagle looks like. But majority Americans agreed with him in terms of his opinion of the bald eagle. Americans didn't like the species. It was wrongfully accused of all sorts of crimes, such as stealing livestock. Bald eagles were accused of flying off with lambs or sheep and goats and pigs and calves and chickens. A bald eagle can carry away a chicken, but they can't carry away any of those other animals. It's too heavy. A large bald eagle, an Alaskan bald eagle with momentum behind it, can lift perhaps 5 or so pounds, or fly away with 5 or so pounds. It cannot fly away with whatever this thing is flying away with. Yet they were accused of that, and they were also accused of doing this. Mothers were warned, don't leave your infant outdoors unattended unless you want a bald eagle to fly away with it to its nest. There are all sorts of stories about this happening. Even ornithologists are making this argument. In the 20th century, there were ornithologists that testified before Congress, said they couldn't deny that bald eagles didn't kidnap babies. This is a Thomas Edison film, silent film 1908, of a bald eagle carrying away a baby. Of course, that's a prop eagle on wires. You can watch this film, by the way, on YouTube in its entirety. McGuffey's Reader, which was the most read book in the 19th century next to the Bible, an English primer for immigrants and children, had a story about an eagle carrying away a child to its nest, and the village rising up to save the child. And the illustration of the eagle carrying away the child is the child in this illustration must be 7, 8 years old. So, what did Americans do? They treated the bald eagle like they did wolves and coyotes and bears and mountain lions, other predators that threatened American livestock. They shot them left and right, hundreds of thousands throughout the 19th century on into the 20th century. You know, every time I look at this picture, I say, forget about running into them, you know, these guys on a dark street. I wouldn't want to run into them in the bright daylight. Do you think those children had to go into therapy at some point in their life? But hundreds of thousands of them. And it was seen, a bald eagle scene was a bald eagle to be shot, and it was seen as civic duty, even if you didn't raise livestock. But it was seen as your civic duty to shoot a bald eagle if you saw one. And Americans did. Whoops, I keep going the wrong way here. And Alaska, the territory of Alaska in 1917 adopted a bounty on bald eagles. So for turning in a set of talons, you could be paid 50 cents from the territory. And that bounty remained in effect until 1952, from 1917 to 1952, the year we went to war in Europe, fighting for freedom, yet we were denying the bird of freedom its own freedom. And during that period, from 1917 to 1952, Alaska paid bounties on over 260,000 bald eagles. But by this time, bald eagles had all but disappeared from the eastern seaboard states, where they were prominent at one time. At the time that the Great Seal of the United States was adopted in Philadelphia, which was the capital at the time, bald eagles were estimated to nest every mile or so along the Delaware River. But they're all gone by the late 19th century. Some states had no nesting bald eagles in the late 19th century. So many Americans, such as this one, Rosalie Edge. Anybody here ever visited Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Pennsylvania? It's a really wonderful place to see migrating raptors in the late summer and fall. But many Americans were worried that the bald eagle would go the way of the passenger pigeon, the last of which died in 1914 in the Cincinnati Zoo, and the Carolina parakeet, the last of which died in 1918 in the Cincinnati Zoo, which says you don't go live in the Cincinnati Zoo. And so many Americans worried about, this symbol of America. It wasn't a national bird, but it was a powerful symbol of America going extinct in the lower 48 states. And so began, such as Rosalie Edge, who lived in New York and started an organization, the Emergency Conservation Committee, to lobby for protective legislation for raptors, including the bald eagle, and to also lobby to abolish the Alaska bounty on bald eagles. She had to start this organization because National Audubon wouldn't do it. The head of National Audubon at that time was a Floridian by the name of T. Gilbert Pearson. He grew up in Archer, Florida, near where I live, in Gainesville. And he would not challenge the Alaskan bounty, and he would not lobby for protection of the bald eagle. He said, well, they're stealing livestock. I've seen them fly off with sheep. And so Rosalie Edge organized the Emergency Conservation Committee to expose the duplicity in the Audubon Society and to push for federal legislation to protect the bald eagle. And in 1940, Congress, a year away from going to war against Nazi tyranny, recognized that this powerful symbol of the United States would be diminished if America allowed the bald eagle to go extinct. So in 1940, Congress passed the Bald Eagle Protection Act, made the bald eagle the only animal in the United States to have its own law. There were other bird protection laws that preceded the Bald Eagle Protection Act, but they applied to multiple species. But the bald eagle got its very own legislation in 1940. Unfortunately, Alaska was given an exemption from the Bald Eagle Protection Act, yet Native peoples, their traditional behaviors were criminalized by the 1940 Bald Eagle Protection Act. Alaska could go out and kill bald eagles, but the Cherokee, for instance, or the Zuni could not go out and shoot bald eagles or capture them. So the law was passed in 1940. 5 years later, what happens? DDT is released on the general market in August of 1945. Devastating for all sorts of wildlife. Marine wildlife that bald eagles depended on, bald eagles and osprey and other fishing birds depended upon, are devastated by DDT. Bird life is devastated by DDT. The bald eagle is devastated by DDT. In 1963, the first census was conducted of nesting population of bald eagles in lower 48, and fewer than 500 were counted across America. Now, let me put this in perspective. When Europeans first began settling North America, the estimated population of bald eagles was 500,000. Yet in 1963, there were fewer than 500 nesting pairs in the United States. And one of the people, the person who probably made the first connection between the bald eagle mortality and DDT was this man, Charles Broley. Anybody heard of Charles Broley? Charles Broley was a retired banker from Winnipeg who moved with his wife and daughter to Tampa in the 1930s. Now he was a banker. He's 60 years old. He's not a scientist. What does he do in retirement? He does this. He starts climbing longleaf and loblolly pines to band eaglets. Nobody was doing it at the time. This banker, this retired banker from Winnipeg, did it for 20 years till age 79. Never fell out of a tree. He had quite a few talons poking him in, but he would climb these nests and he would band the eaglets. And he noticed that in the 40s, in the late 40s and on into the 50s, the bald eagle population plummeting in Florida, in other parts of the United States. And he assumed that, and wrote an article for Audubon magazine, making this connection between the mortality of bald eagles and DDT. Rachel Carson writes about him in Silent Spring. So, what happens? People start organizing again. We got to get rid of DDT. We've got to protect the bald eagle and other birds as well, including this woman, Doris Mager. Anybody here heard of Doris Mager? There are a lot of really wonderful Floridians in this book. This book covers the entire United States, but Florida. There's some really wonderful Florida stories in the book, and Doris Mager is one of these stories. 1972 was a watershed year for bald eagles. In that year, Congress increased the penalty, U.S. Fish and Wildlife increased the penalty under the Bald Eagle Protection Act for harming bald eagles. Congress added raptors to the 1918 Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and also during that year, the EPA banned the sale of DDT in the United States. Very brave move on the part of the administrator, William Ruckelshaus, appointed by Richard Nixon, who supported the ban of the sale of DDT in the U.S. Also in 1972, 50 years ago, next month, Congress, by strong bipartisan support, passed the Clean Water Act. barely 1/3 of the nation's waters, coastal waters and inland waters, were safe for swimming and fishing. So, those of you who grew up in Florida can remember, I grew up on Tampa Bay. Back in the 70s, I could catch a croaker. You couldn't catch hardly a fish. And the only birds we ever saw were brown pelicans, and not very many of those, and gulls. We'll never kill off gulls. But today, thanks to the Clean Water Act, Tampa Bay is a great place to go fishing. The bird life is spectacular, like I've never seen it before. And this was true for bodies of water, rivers and lakes and bays, estuarine environments across the country. This was our habitat, but it was also the fishing habitat of bald eagles. So with these chess pieces in place, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife in 1976 launched an eagle restoration program in New York, which was a success, and began launching similar programs across the United States to bring the bald eagles back. And then there were people like Doris Mager who would go around. She was with Florida Audubon Society, and she would go around the state and then eventually the entire country and educate people on bald eagles. In 1979, she spent 6 days, she lived 6 days in an abandoned bald eagle's nest in Maitland, Florida, to bring awareness to the bald eagle's plight and to raise money to establish a rehab center, a raptor rehab center in Maitland at Florida Audubon. And in this picture, who's that on the left? That's Governor Bob Grant. This is 1986. Doris Mager, who's 60 years old, is just coming to the end of a bike ride across the country from San Diego to Merritt Island to raise awareness about bald eagles and other raptors. This is General Patton with her, who traveled in a support van along the way. And Kmart sponsored her, and she would stop at Kmart stores and give lectures in the parking lots of the stores. I want to read to you just an excerpt from the book about Doris Mager that I didn't know about Doris Mager until I started writing this book, or Charles Broley, and I was just fascinated to learn about her. And I found her such an interesting character. And I interviewed her when she was 94 years old, sharp as can be, living in Washington State at the time. And she said that this was in the middle of COVID, she said, as soon as COVID is over, I'm going back out on the road. Bulging out from between the upper branches of a loblolly pine, a large finger-lapped arrangement of sticks formed the familiar aesthetic of an industrious eagle couple. For some unknown reason, the pair had not returned for the 1979 nesting season. Staring up, Doris Mager was aware of the centrality of nests in the lives of bald eagles. Those compositions of meticulous labor, enigmas of intricacy and strength that marry art with utility, are essential to the renewal of life. The identity of few birds is as closely attached to their nest as the bald eagle's is to its. None in North America build larger or stouter ones. The balds are emblematic of their species' resilience. Nests had been a key variable in determining the population's decline, and they would be imperative to its revival. Without them, Mager knew, there would be no birds. Mager was also aware of the violent, spontaneous weather that frequented Central Florida. Appropriate night for saying that. And at the moment, dark clouds filled the sky to the west. Standing at the foot of the loblolly, one hand hesitantly on a climbing ladder, hanging down from the height of a fire lookout tower, she was intent on spending time in the nativity of the former occupants. Mager had never scaled a tree before, much less in a storm. She reached over and touched an ominous-looking lightning scar running down the tree's trunk to the ground. Pushing ahead of the storm, the wind pulsed, and the green needles trembled in the branches high above. One eyewitness described the tree as spindly. Another called it wind-whipped. Jeff Klinkenberg, the outdoor editor for the St. Petersburg Times, is the one who used the word spindly. Here she was, he reflected decades later, 53 years old and climbing a ladder I would not have dared to climb at my age then, 30. Before putting herself at the mercy of the swelling wind, Mager tied a red bandana around her head of silver hair, which she had had cut and styled in a new hairdo for the occasion. Owl earrings dangled beside her cheeks, and retaining the raptor theme, a spread eagle necklace wreathed her neck. She wore black jeans, a denim shirt, and gray running shoes. Yet her jogging routine had been inconsistent of late. In relating that detail, she confessed to Klinkenberg, "I've got fat little legs, and I probably shouldn't be that far off the ground at my age." She slipped into a safety harness secured to an upper branch. Alongside the harness line, the grounding cable of a lightning rod chased down the side of the tree. A number of precautions were taken that day, and Mager added one of her own by swallowing a motion sickness pill. "I get airsick and I get seasick," she again confessed to Klinkenberg, "and I'm probably going to get nest sick." Mager put one foot up on a lower rung and followed that with the other on the next rung. Grabbing a third at eye level with both hands, she stared nervously into the tree's rust-colored, scaly bark and coaxed herself up toward a 50-foot summit. Whenever the wind kicked up, the tree creaked like an old door. When it swung like one, she would pause, grip the ladder tighter, and take a deep breath. She shouted to a friend below, "Get down on your knees and pray, Viola." So because of the work of people like volunteers like Doris Mager, Fish and Wildlife, state wildlife officials, because of all these restoration programs, the bald eagle population bounced back pretty quickly. It had been listed on the Endangered Species Act in 1974. The act was passed a year before, but it was listed in 1974. And it came off the list in 2007 when the nesting population in the lower 48 was somewhere between 10 and 11,000. In the 2010s, the bald eagle population quadrupled. Now, we owe ourselves a pat on the back for doing right by the bald eagle, by doing right by the environment and helping it come back to life. But we also have to attribute that comeback to the bald eagles themselves. They have what I describe as the ideal family values. They mate for life. They maintain a fidelity to the same nest for life as long as that nest exists, as long as it doesn't go down in a storm or somebody comes along and illegally cuts down a nesting tree. It's a federal offense to do so. You can get put in jail and fined very heavily if you do so. They raise their young with such care and such devotion. They feed them so well that by the time the young leave their natal territory between 18 and 20 weeks, they often weigh more than mom and dad. And mom and dad will wait for their children to leave first. Typically, there are 2 eggs to a nest, sometimes just 1, sometimes 3, but typically 2. Mom and dad will wait for their kids to leave, to go off, migrate somewhere before they leave. Mom flies in her direction, goes off her way. Dad goes off his way, which may be the secret to a lifelong relationship. So today, the estimated population of the bald eagle in North America is 500,000, which is what was the estimated population at the time the first Europeans came to North America. This is Sarge, who lives in Largo, Florida. She's a flightless eagle at a rehab center there, McGowan, also known as Narrows City Park, where they have a raptor rehab center. She is an education bird. She's taken around the state and to raise awareness about wildlife, including bald eagles. There are rehab centers across the country. Every state has at least one. Many of them have a number of rehab centers. And if you want to support the bald eagle, these rehab centers are a great way to do that. But she's also the bird who's on my arm in my author photo of the book. So why don't I stop there and take any questions you might have. Is that okay, Mike? Yeah. Oh, we got a microphone. No questions? Was that informative? Come on, yeah, must have the question. Well, thank you. You guys deserve the applause for coming out in this weather.
No question?
In a nest? It was that what strangest thing people found in a nest? Is that what you asked? Okay. A number of things. One scientist I wrote about, who was really the first person to study the domestic life of bald eagles, which he did so in the 1920s. He's the one who measured that big nest I was talking about. He found all sorts of things, including a framed picture of a photograph of a family. But all sorts of, they collect all sorts of things, and unfortunately, often what they'll find, you can find, unfortunately, fishing line in their nests, which can, as you know, can be dangerous to birds. But articles of clothing articles, you name it, all sorts of things. Rachel Carson writes about finding a fishing boot in the nest of a bald eagle. Yes?
How did you go about getting your references and your information? In other words, how did you do your research to get the information in this book?
Well, as an environmental historian, you have to know science, and you have to do a lot of research into scientific documents. So I did a lot of research in scientific documents, whether journal articles or government documents that have been created by government scientists. Government documents generally, secondary sources, other research books on birds generally, it was Charles Broglie's wife wrote a biography of her husband. I interviewed people such as Doris Mager. A number of people were involved in eagle restoration program in Massachusetts and Florida and British Columbia. And so newspapers, I was able to find information in newspapers dating back to the colonial period. I did remember I said hundreds of thousands of bald eagles were shot or killed during the 19th century. I did a search on newspapers.com, which is a collection of daily and weekly newspapers from across the country, smaller ones, not like the New York Times or the Washington Post. And I searched a date range from 1850 to 1920. 3 words, bald eagle shot in quotation marks. That means it has to be an exact match. I got over 140,000 hits. Here's the question here. Why do we call the bald eagle bald? Well, so many people believe that the name comes from the word piebald, which refers to mottled coloring of an animal, dark and light coloring, generally white or dark brown or something. And so many people think it came from piebald. And we don't know who is the first one to call the bald eagle the bald eagle. But there's also a possibility that it's in reference to its behavior, because bald also doesn't just mean this, it also means brazen. And so it could come from that. Many early Americans, including ornithologists, refused, and John James Audubon was one, refused to call the bald eagle bald because it's not bald. There are feathers on its head. And so they instead preferred the American eagle to the bald eagle. But some people called it the American bald eagle. Well, he's retrieving that. Can you go ahead and ask your question? You want to? Oh, okay. Well, my most memorable, gosh, just going out to Paynes Prairie with Justin Bright a couple of years ago and watching the action out there, watching a bald eagle stealing from other bald eagles, stealing fish or from osprey and fighting over them in the air. Conowingo Dam, anybody here from Maryland or Pennsylvania? Conowingo Dam in northern Maryland, just below the Pennsylvania border, on the Susquehanna River, is a great place to go eagle watching in the wintertime. I was up there at Thanksgiving a number of years ago, and not only were there hundreds of eagles there fishing, because it's easy pickings, because when the fish run through the tunnels, the release tunnels of the dam, they end up on the downside, either dead or stunned, and so bald eagles are there to scoop them up and take them away. But not only were there hundreds of bald eagles, there were hundreds of photographers standing there, all lined up with their $10,000 lenses and their tripods. And half of those photographers were dressed in camouflage, and their lenses are camouflaged, and their tripods are camouflaged. So that was one of the more interesting experiences. I went in Alaska, observed them there, out on the Aleutian Islands, took my daughter and one of her cousins, and that was a fabulous experience. And it was interesting to see them. One of the best places to go see them at Dutch Harbor, Alaska, which is where they filmed The Deadliest Catch. If any of you have seen that on Discovery, one of the best places to see the bald eagles there was at the dump. Yes. And then I'll come over here. Yes, go ahead. How long did it take the Audubon Society to recognize that the bald eagle should be a protected species? No, it was John James Audubon, not the Audubon Society, who created this third species. Well, here's the interesting thing. Alexander Wilson, who was his contemporary and also an ornithologist, years before had already said, look, you people are identifying a third species of eagle that's actually the immature bald eagle. He'd already had it in print. It was already in print. But John James Audubon insisted he had found a third, and a bird that was worthy enough to be named after George Washington. As far as I know. And by the way, his last words, John James Audubon's last words are really interesting. But guess what? And this gentleman here, you had a question? Yes. How many feathers? Approximately 7,000. Oh, a few thousand. In a long one, on a long headdress, yes, a few thousand, yeah, and there are not always bald eagle feathers. A lot of those feathers can be turkey feathers that that are bleached or dyed or painted, excuse me, not bleached, but painted. But those headdresses, yeah, thousands. And that's, it's one of the things that's happening today is that Native American powwows have become very popular tourist attractions. And the powwows are traditionally a religious exercise or ritual, but they become commercialized. And unfortunately, and even Native peoples for whom the powwow is not a part of their tradition, engage in these powwows. They're powwow costume contests, and unfortunately, that has stimulated a what do you call it? An underground trade. What do you call it? Black market. Thank you. A black market in bald eagle feathers and bald eagles and golden eagles, which are protected, are being illegally killed and their feathers sold on the black market. Now, I should say, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has been working very hard in the last decade or so to try to help Native peoples restore their traditional relationship with bald eagles. So there are a couple of Native groups that are allowed to take bald eagles out of the wild, and there are 7 Native American eagle aviaries, which are also rehab centers, and so Native Americans can, for those flightless birds, they can keep them for life and collect their feathers. And today, if you find a dead bald eagle, you are required by law to turn it into the authorities. And even if you find a bald eagle feather, you are required by law to turn that into the authorities, which will, and eventually the carcass or the feathers will end up with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which will ship the body of the feathers to the National Eagle Repository right outside of Denver, where the birds are processed, the bodies are processed, and all of the parts and feathers go exclusively to Native peoples. Yes?
Is all the new development in Florida still a threat?
Yes, development is still a threat because unfortunately sometimes developers are able to get exemptions or exceptions and have a bald eagle nest removed. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has to grant it. During the last presidential administration, that was happening a lot. I think that's slowed down now. But the greatest threat to bald eagles is lead poisoning from hunting. Now, hunters are among our original conservationists. They are among our staunchest conservationists. Big game hunters, however, use lead, shot, or bullets. Big game meaning deer and elk and other animals of that size. And they also tend to gut their kill in the woods, which seems like a good thing. They're repurposing the guts. Let the wildlife have it. I don't need it. Let the wildlife have it. But unfortunately, the gut pile is often contaminated by lead from the shot, and a shard of lead the size of a grain of rice can kill a bald eagle. And so the Obama administration initiated or actually instituted in national wildlife areas, or actually on government property, instituted a ban on lead shot. But then the next presidential administration removed that ban. I don't know where the Biden administration stands now, but there's a pretty strong movement. California condors are in really bad shape because of lead poisoning. They're scavengers like bald eagles, and they are in grave danger of going extinct. And the state of California, I think it was in the past year, banned lead shot in hunting. That's already happened. Years ago, that happened in waterfowl hunting. They used steel bullets in waterfowl hunting, but steel bullets for big game will just run right through them, and the animal will run away. You need something that mimics lead, such as copper, and it's a bit more expensive than lead.
Well, thank you, Jack.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And I'm told that this is all set up out there, everything's all set up out there, so you can get this book the one Jack has it with. He's got several out there.
Am I going to be set up back there to sign? Okay.